Here we go. I put some light on my face, and some purists will complain that it's not done well or whatever. I should reduce the gap. Okay, so let's continue with the extreme heat action plan, the call for action from Antonio Guterres. Economic impacts, we'll see a table in a minute, but the extreme heat impacts on lives, livelihoods, and environment having some connection to economic impacts is supposed to motivate governments, firms, corporations, etc. to be more aware of the need for action on heat waves. Extreme heat is having devastating impacts on the global economy. One important channel is through diminished worker productivity. When temperatures rise above 24 to 26 degrees C, labor productivity begins to decline. At 33 to 34 degrees C, productivity drops by 50%. Okay, so many such numbers. The figures show that with rising temperature, economic losses will rise, and there are all sorts of numbers quoted here. And implementing occupational safety and health OSH measures to prevent occupational injuries related to excessive heat could save over $361 billion globally. This is supposed to motivate governments, firms, and communities to make plans to protect workers and, of course, everybody from extreme heat. Of course, you remember Bill Nordhaus started this idea of impact of global warming on economies in the 1970s. He was the first one to throw up this number 2 degrees C as a kind of a threshold we should really worry about, and then it became sacrosanct because the European governments took it up. Scientists bent over backward to fit impacts into that, and then small island states said 2 degrees C is too high, we should go dial it down to 1.5 degrees C as a target. So this report mentions 1.5 degrees C threshold as well, but I have podcasts elsewhere talking about how this is not scientific. But the most important thing is we should just worry about what the local impacts will be with each 0.1 degree warming, let's say. Okay, so there are social costs. So poor people pay a higher price, children, elderly, women, and so on. And healthcare sector, often they are not ready for crisis management, let alone resilience and preparing. A lot of health insurance companies now have wellness coaches who call you and ask you how you're doing, what's your blood pressure, what's your blood sugar, and so on and so forth, especially if you're older. So there is health care that is going beyond just paying for your illness and trying to keep you prepared for mitigating factors that will make you sick and so on. Education, of course, there are lots of claims now of number of school days closures increasing and kids missing school, and a lot of people highlight this, and there is no doubt that number of, if duration, frequency, and intensity and area covered by heat waves are increasing, then school closures will increase. So number of school days missed is increasing, and then you have to see whether that's specifically worse for poor people because schools they go to are not protected against heat waves, whereas rich kids may be going to schools that are better protected, and so on. Agriculture and food, no doubt at all that crops and irrigation, water requirements, yields, everything is going to be affected by extreme heat. So if extreme heat events are increasing, impact will show up in agriculture and food. Storage requirements, spoilage, waste, everything is going to go up. Environment, loss of biodiversity, wildfires, droughts exacerbated, and so on and so forth, and increasing demand for humanitarian assistance. If Pakistan or Bangladesh or some parts of Africa get hit with 50 degrees, 52 degrees, and large scale debilitating impacts happen, there will be demands for humanitarian assistance. Energy impacts, of course, cooling accounts for almost 20% of global electricity consumption. And the projections say, based on current policies, between now and 2050, the installed capacity of cooling equipment globally will almost triple. resulting in electricity consumption more than doubling. Okay, so we often focus on extreme heat and cooling requirements and warming, chronic warming and increased air conditioning demand, but there are also numbers that the heating costs are also very high and often much higher than cooling. So we have to also keep an eye on that, because if you remember the impact of Russian invasion of Ukraine, Europe started burning more coal and started saying natural gas is a low emission fossil fuel, so some fancy footwork was done to deal with their winter heating requirements. So we are all in this together. Infrastructure and built environment, of course, has an impact from extreme heat. So there is an urgent need to evaluate the resilience of critical infrastructure and the built environment to extreme heat and adopt measures to gradually strengthen their resilience. This is easier said than done, because resilience means you go beyond crisis management of heat waves as they occur and plan for the future. So you have to plan these resilience ideas into building back better when there are reasons to build back after, say, natural hazards, or build better when there are new infrastructures coming up. But those things have to be accounted for in the budget, in the fiscal policies, and so on. That's not always easy. Okay, so there are lots of ideas on how to create buildings that are heat trapping, reduce heat trapping and ventilation, vegetation, energy use, and so on and so forth. So calls for urgent need for transformation of the built environment, transformation that must be supported by the construction industry, which in turn must be supported by market-based mechanisms and enabling policy environment. So incentivizing individuals and firms to worry about resilience in infrastructure and built environment is not only about what government builds, like bridges and water infrastructure or roads and so on, but also people's houses development for residential, commercial properties, and so on and so forth. So extreme heat impacts by numbers. We already looked at this 489,000 heat related deaths between 2000 and 2019 each year, more than from tropical cyclones. 80 million working hours, equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs, could be lost due to heat stress by 2030. That's just a few years ago. And there are it was 12% of all food produced is lost due to a lack of cooling. This is a deadly impact. In fact, 9.1% annual so that's an annual 1 degree C increase in temperature leads to a 9.1% increase in poverty. There are uncertainties in doing these because there are many assumptions, but that's not the point. If there is a risk, what are you going to do about it? What actionable information can come out of this at local scales? Triple the installed capacity of cooling equipment globally will almost triple by 2050. So unless you have renewable energy and refrigerants that are not greenhouse gases, this can be a deadly feedback. More than 80 million students are impacted by worldwide school closures due to heat in 2024 alone. Extreme heat solutions then, scaling up heat health warning system in 57 countries alone can save about 98,314 lives per year. That's a very specific number, but whatever the uncertainty, it's a large number. Occupational safety and health measures can save 361 billion a year in medical and other costs. Offset costs are always hard to people realize the cost when they have to pay for it, whether it's insurance companies, healthcare, governments, and so on. But when you offset the cost, how do you account for that? Reducing cooling energy demand can cut electricity bills for end users by 1 trillion by 2050. Okay, sobering numbers obviously re-emphasize the need to care for the vulnerable and call to action on extreme heat, which I will do in the next podcast because it's a nice separate topic, and I will leave this here. But remember, we are doing this in multiple podcasts. So I said it's only a 20-page report, but if I do it properly and provide all the main points, it does end up being almost a 1 hour seminar, so that's okay. I've split it into little podcasts so you can watch as you please, or just watch one podcast and not all of them together, and so on and so forth. Let's come back and wrap it up in the next podcast then. Okay.